Item 3, the public participation, 3.1, public forum, and Jenny Gillies regarding the Enchanted Garden in the tea kiosk in the Botanic Gardens. So we, as we came into the chamber this morning, obviously we saw that there was going to be some very visual public participation. Jenny, thank you for being with us this morning. If you'd like to come forward to the table, and you have 5 minutes to make your presentation. Great to have you with us this morning.
Mr. Chairman, Madam CEO and councillors, well, I'm Jenny Gillies. I've currently got an exhibition on in the tea kiosk in the gardens. I'm running this in conjunction with the Botanic Gardens and, of course, the Christchurch City Council. We have been running since December, so up to date, up to the end of June, we have actually had getting on over 8,000 people in. We're averaging probably 44 a day, of course very weather dependent. You know, some days we will have hundreds, others not quite as busy as that. We're getting in lots of schools, which is actually an added bonus for me. The feedback is actually huge. People would love to see this actually as a permanent feature actually in the city, and I think they regard it as sort of almost as a replacement for the Festival of Flowers and, of course, of late Ellerslie. So I'm trying to reflect currently what's going on in the gardens by changing my costumes seasonally, and so it is a rotating and growing exhibition. Now, when it opened in December the 16th, the media caught the attention of a very prestigious flower show in the UK, the Harrogate Flower Show, which is regarded as the premier event for floral art, and I was invited and funded over there, and I found this a great opportunity to promote Christchurch. They actually thought of calling it the Christchurch Connection, and when I was actually over there, I discovered that in the 1950s the superintendent of our Botanic Gardens had supplied seed and given it to the Valley Gardens in Harrogate, and they took me around and showed me the native garden there. So that was actually basically started here in our beautiful city. So that was great for me, and I have actually been approached over the last few months to take it elsewhere, but my aim is actually to keep it here. I'm a Cantabrian. I'm very staunch about that. I'm very staunch about the Garden City image, and I want to promote this as a tourist venture, and also as I also like to see it as an education, from an educational point of view. Now, we've had a lot of high schools through. We've had ESOL students, we've had visually impaired, which is great because of the size of my costumes, as you'll understand. I have a lot of design and textile students. I have technology teachers coming through. A lot of exchange overseas students that are affiliated with various high schools around. And we have U3A, the university for slightly older people like me, and we, as I said before, intermediate and a lot of high schools. I'm currently mentoring, or I'm a stakeholder for some of the NCA students pursuing technology, and this is a part of it I really enjoy and would like to see it developed further. And this is what I am appealing to you for as well. Currently, it is extended until December. Now, anyone would realise that's the height of the tourism season, and this is when we really get huge numbers through. Now, as I feel this is totally unique, and this has been stated by the numerous visitors that come through, and I might add the majority, as well as locals and tourists from out New Zealand, a huge number of UK visitors. That's where I've found it really lies. I would like to get into the Chinese market and things through trips, but I have to go to source for those. And this is where I'm not asking for ratepayer money. I'm asking for support from the City Council and perhaps seeing this as a more permanent venture, and perhaps support with marketing and giving me inroads into these markets where I can actually develop this more as a tourist attraction for our beautiful garden city. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And that does allow time for a couple of questions, if indeed there are the opportunity for questions. A spin through, yeah. Give us a bit of a twirl.
These
through
are
the
my
chamber,
flower girls. I actually currently employ 4 part-timers And these are two of my delightful flower girls that help me down at the kiosk.
Fabulous. So that does leave the opportunity for a couple of questions if any councillors do have questions. Dion.
I just wanted to ask, have you been in touch with Christchurch NZ, the new tourism and economic development?
No, I haven't yet. I was waiting for this to be made more permanent. As you understand, for 6 months it was rather temporary, and I didn't want to put, because I am financing it myself, I didn't really want to, well, I'm paying the wages. I didn't really want to be putting a lot of money into something which could have, at any time, I could be asked to move on. So, but I feel that Christchurch are really behind it, and I've got a huge amount of support from the community.
I'd say that would probably be a great place to sort of go and talk to next.
I will.
Yeah.
Yes, I will. I wanted to do that, and, well, whatever else that you could advise me on, because as a member of the public, sometimes we don't actually we don't know those contexts which are so important for something like this.
Is there somebody that we could link them with?
So I'm going to move in a minute that we refer the matters raised in the public participation to the appropriate committee so that it can be picked up at the committee level. So I'll do that in a moment. I've got a further question now from Aaron.
Yeah, as we like to include everyone at this council, Jenny, do you make them in boys' sizes?
Yes, I do. My husband, sorry, I probably was meant to press something on here, I don't know, but, oh no, you're seeing it anyway. I don't know if you've got a page which, yeah, there's a page with a red hot poker on it. You could actually, what do I do? Which one? No, that one. Okay, there is some, this is, sorry, now we can have a slideshow. That's actually the red hot poker. Now that's my husband's in that, namely there, right. When you're marrying,
press that one there.
which one? And you can see I'm not good on a computer. Sorry, I'm livening up your meeting for you. There we are. That's some of the coverage. And the Harrogate, that was, the girls were freezing in the freezing Yorkshire weather there. I had so much news media, I couldn't believe it. BBC National covered it, and it went worldwide to New York, China, and the London Times and everything. So there was a good bit of coverage there. And, yes, sorry, now I'm learning how to use a computer. That's another thing I'd like advice on, how to use. I'm not good. I'm okay on a sewing machine, right? Not brilliant with computers. That's why I need a flower. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, well, thank you very much indeed for bringing such a colourful and vibrant bit of public participation to our meeting this morning. It's certainly got our meeting off to a good start.
Thank you for allowing me to talk.
Great. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. So I will now move that we thank Jenny Gillies for the participation, for her participation in the meeting, and refer the matters raised to the appropriate committee. Thank Jenny Gillies for her participation in the public forum and refer the matters raised to the appropriate committee. So I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder?
I'm just wondering if you add to the thanking her for not just participating here, but also keeping Christchurch, New Zealand as the garden city on the world map as well. I think that's important words.
And being an ambassador.
Yeah, a great ambassador for the garden city.
Well, we've also done it in Adelaide, and of course that was doing it. And I was had a meeting with the Lord Mayor over there, and actually I also had a meeting with the Mayor of York and the Mayor of Harrogate, who wants to come over and see you. Yes, so it's great to be able to promote the city.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So Aaron, you're suggesting a change in the wording. Thank Jenny Gillies for her participation in the meeting, and maybe just for the important work she's doing promoting Christchurch.
An international ambassador of the garden city. Let's bestow that honour upon her.
Okay, so for
important work as an international.
Yeah, for the important work. Yeah, for the important work she is doing as an international ambassador for the Garden City. Yeah, and refers the matters raised in the public forum to the appropriate committee. That's great. Okay, great. And then just correction of the ambassador. Yeah, that's it. All right, great. So I'm happy to move that. Dion, you're happy to second. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much indeed for providing such a colourful start to our meeting today. Great. Okay, now that then brings us to item 3.2, deputations by appointment. And the first deputation relates to the living wage item on our agenda today. Now, as became obvious through the apologies, the Mayor's absent today, and in the case of a matter as important as the living wage, and in particular where there are aspects of this decision which could have, depending how the debate and the decision goes, could have an implication for the long-term plan. Of course, the long-term plan is a piece of work which is led by the Mayor. So my thinking certainly is that it's important that the Mayor is part of the decision. So I'll be moving shortly as a procedural motion that the living wage matter be left lying on the table until next week's meeting, so delayed by just 1 week, so that the Mayor is able to be part of that decision. We will certainly still hear the deputation today, and certainly acknowledging the fact that people have travelled some distance to be here to make this deputation. And the other commitment that we will make is that before this is debated next week, anybody who will be part of that debate and decision next week who's not in the room at the moment will review the footage of the deputation, which is going out on the live stream today and will be available for review, so that everybody has got the same information and has had the ability to see the information that's about to be presented to us now before we get to the point of the debate and decision next week. So at that point I'd like to invite Matt Danaher from representing ETU and the Living Wage Steering Group. Matt, I know you've travelled some distance to be with us today. Thank you for joining us, and certainly take heart from the comments that I've made around the opportunity for review of the footage of the deputation that you're about to make to us. So you have 10 minutes. That would include time for any questions if you wanted to leave time. Over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. Thank you, everyone. I would like to acknowledge, first of all, before I start, I'd like to acknowledge people in the room. I'd like to acknowledge all of you as councillors and the Deputy Mayor, and I'd like to acknowledge the Mayor who can't be here today for giving us the opportunity to make this deputation today. We really appreciate it, and I hope the fact that I've come here from Auckland is evidence of sort of how much we have invested in your views and how much we care about what happens in Christchurch. I'd also like to acknowledge the people sat behind, the ratepayers of Christchurch who are sat behind me, many of them resplendent, maybe not quite as colourful as the flower garden people, but certainly colourful in their red t-shirts. And I'd also like to acknowledge the people that are behind them, because I think it's really important when we're talking about the living wage movement to recognise that we're not just here as individuals, but all of us, whether it's unions, whether it's faith groups, whether it's employers. And I think Christian World Services are in the room today, who are an accredited living wage employer here in Christchurch. So, you know, I think it's really important to remember those people. And I'd also just like to extend a special acknowledgement to the 9 councillors who signed that pledge on the living wage when they stood for election, and kind of were prepared to test support for that idea with the public. And obviously, you know, they're here today, so it goes to show that that was worth doing. Now, I realise I've only got 10 minutes, and there's some factual stuff that we'll probably want to go over, but I think it's probably best to leave that for questions and answers. And I'd just like to start by talking about my journey here today, which actually didn't just start at 4:30 this morning when I left my house. It actually started in the early 80s when I was a child, and in England. And when you grow up in England, you learn several things about New Zealand. You learn that it's a beautiful country with amazing scenery and environment. You learn about the culture and diversity, and the fact that it's a society of equality, or that aims for equality where possible, and a society that has overcome kind of issues to grow together. And you also learn about the 3 cities, and you know, any English person can name 3 cities in New Zealand, and they are Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. And you know, a popular pub quiz question in the UK is what is the capital of New Zealand, and you would not be surprised probably to hear how many people, maybe not in Harrogate, who know it as the Garden City, but elsewhere who would put Christchurch down potentially as the capital. You know, it really is seen as one of the great cities of New Zealand. This is my first time here actually, and I wish I had a bit longer to spend here. But the reason I'm here today, and my journey that I referred to, is because when I grew up and I got involved in kind of trying to find ways, whether it's through the union movement or through community groups, trying to find ways of improving people's lives, ways of helping people put food on the table and so on. You know, we would make arguments with employers, with communities, with politicians and so on in the UK, where you say, look, these things can work in other countries can be more equal societies, you know, we can learn from that and we can do that here. And you always look, in the UK, you always look at the Nordic countries when you're making that argument, you might look at Germany, you also always referred, or used to refer to, certainly referred to New Zealand as an example of a more equal society, a better way of doing things. And, you know, that led to me wanting to come here myself as an immigrant and moving to this country in November last year. So I've not been here long. And so far, what I've seen here has not disappointed me at all, except for one thing. I have come to a country which I came to a country in 2016, which was basically a low-waged economy, from what I could see. It was pretty clear to me arriving in Auckland that there were hundreds of thousands of people in New Zealand working 2-3 jobs, working 50, 60 hours a week, you know, just to put food on the table, sometimes not even to keep a roof over their heads, but just to keep their car on the road, because that's what they're living on. And I know you lot know all about that, and I don't need to go into any more detail about that. But what I would like to say is that in 2017, it feels like I've arrived at exactly the right moment, because 2017 is the moment that New Zealand said no to being a low-waged economy. With the equal pay settlement for thousands of caregivers, and with the increasing adoption of the living wage by a whole range of employers, whether they're private sector, whether they're small, medium or large, whether they're voluntary sector or whether they're local government, are deciding to stand alongside the faith-based movements, the community groups and the trade unions that have been saying, actually, we don't think it's enough to pay people poverty wages, we want to pay them enough to live on. And it really feels like a moment, like the tide is turning, and we're going to once again be able to sell New Zealand as being the most equal, one of the most equal countries in the world. And I think that the living wage is a key part of that, and that's why I'm here today. And that's why I'm in Christchurch as well, because as you will know, Wellington City Council, and I understand there may have been some confusing reports on the radio this morning, but Wellington City Council is pretty much paying nearly all its contractors and all its directly employed staff already the living wage, which is $20.20 an hour. Auckland City Council, as you know, made a decision this year to start moving directly employed staff towards the living wage. We now have an opportunity for the third great city of New Zealand to join them, to stand shoulder to shoulder and say, yes, we agree, we want to see people in our city paid enough to live on, and we're going to lead by example. So that's why I'm here today. That's the reason for my journey. Just to move on now to what we put in our written submission, our written deputation, sorry, which hopefully you've got in front of you on your iPads. There was a lot of, a lot of this is responding to the report you received that was made to the Strategic Capability Committee on the 11th of May. And I would like to start by just saying, by also acknowledging actually the people that put the hard work, the people who work for the Council and who are on the Strategic Committee and who put the hard work into producing this report. It's a really interesting, useful and helpful report for us. And in particular, I'm very interested in the demographic information that is provided, which obviously talks a lot about the sort of age profile and the kind of nature of work that is done by the people that are currently receiving less than the living wage in direct employment in Christchurch City Council. However, I do have to say I am a little disappointed that there's actually no gender or ethnicity breakdown in here, because I think if I've seen anything over the years I've been involved in trying to, be part of a movement that improves people's lives, it's that overwhelmingly the people who suffer from life, who have to put up with life on low wages, life with multiple jobs, life working really long hours when they can't be with their family, is women. And it's also quite clear to me, certainly in Auckland probably more than here, that there's also an ethnic dimension to low wages as well. And I think it would actually be really interesting to start gathering that information as well at this level, so we can start measuring the difference that can be made to people's lives by low wages. Now, just as well, in the submission, I refer to several other papers which I understand have also been distributed. Now, I'm sure you may have questions about some of them, but I want to draw your attention to one in particular that I was actually slightly wary about including, because it's the Treasury paper on using IDI data to estimate fiscal impact. Sorry, I have to look at it when I'm saying it, it's such a long title. Using the data to estimate fiscal impacts of better social sector performance. Now, I'm sure you all read through the 28 pages of this last night and have come up with some questions around it. But if you haven't had a chance to do that, I'd just like to make it clear the reason why I decided in the end to include this, and it was a last minute, 10 minutes to 3 decision to include this. That's because one of the issues I found going around to New Zealand talking about the benefits, and some of them are listed in the paper that I've submitted to you, the benefits of the living wage, the experiences we're using, the stories we're using, especially when we're talking about large-scale public sector employers, are from overseas. They're from the UK, in fact, and in fact, as somebody who was involved in the living wage movement in the UK, I have seen these firsthand, so I can speak to them with some, and I am convinced. However, what we don't have yet is real quantitative data that demonstrates the real benefits of the living wage in a New Zealand context. Why this interests me, this Treasury report, is because it is a suggestion that going forward the Treasury is going to be analysing that along with other things to look at the ongoing fiscal impact of introducing the living wage, fiscal and social impact I should add, of introducing the living wage to low paid people and at-risk people and certain vulnerable groups within New Zealand society going forward. What this is a evidence-based kind of underlying is being created that will help us tell our own story of the benefits of the living wage in an entirely New Zealand context. And that's why I think it's really exciting, because you'll also see that Christchurch is one of the cities looked at as well. So we are actually going to be able to see potentially, we're going to be able to look back in 2 or 3 years and see what kind of impact your decision that you're going to be taking next Thursday now has had on your people in however small a scale. Now, there's lots more in my paper I could talk to, but I've actually run out of time. Apologies for that. I understand you may have questions. Of course, now taking into account that you are going to be voting next week, it may be that questions come to us afterwards via email, and I'm happy to ask Joe Daly or someone to circulate my details, and happy to talk to any councillor on the phone or via email about any questions you may have. But thank you. That's me.
Yep, and thank you very much indeed for the deputation this morning. Now, there are 3 people have signalled questions to me, and on the basis that we'll have 1 question per person and we'll keep them really brief and succinct, I will allow those 3 questions, which are from Sarah, Phil and Aaron, but there won't be time for any further questions. So Sarah, and if we can keep these really brief and succinct, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for providing all that extra information. It was really, really useful. You've mentioned that both Wellington and Auckland, my understanding is that they haven't made a decision to sort of go ahead and fully implement immediately. They've done a stepped approach, is that right?
So certainly in Auckland they've decided to take a stepped approach, yes. Well, they're starting in September. The first kind of increments are going to start coming in, which will substantially lift up the lowest paid workers. And it's also just worth very briefly mentioning that it's being implemented there as part of a working group which includes representatives from the living wage movement, including employers, and it includes representatives from the PSA and council staff and HR and so on, working together to see how they can make it work.
Thank you. Phil.
Thank you very much, Matt. In our report, you may have seen there's reference to a Government and Treasury report 2014, I think, where the argument is that one reason not that we don't need a living wage is because a lot of the people who are below the living wage, in fact, are young or they're part-time, there may be students, and they're implicit they won't have children or dependents. I just wonder if you might comment about that, our New Zealand Government's Treasury argument.
Yeah, I mean, there is evidence, age-based evidence there, and you've provided it yourself in your own council report in regards to the council. However, what we would say is, just because someone's young doesn't mean they don't have children, doesn't mean they don't have dependents, doesn't mean they don't have elderly relatives that they're supporting. It doesn't mean that they're not the kind of person that I've spoken to who puts the fuel in their parents' car so their low-paid parent can get to work. So I would personally argue that age is absolutely irrelevant. And I would also, just one final point as succinctly as I can on that, in your report it shows that a lot of the people who are earning less than the living wage at the moment are lifeguards and swimming instructors, and it occurs to me they're the people teaching your kids to swim. Your kids are not going to. So, do you want to be paying them poverty wages, or do you want to pay them enough to live on, irrespective of whether they're supporting a family or not?
Thank you. And finally, Aaron.
Yeah, so I would have asked you some questions, but we are out of time, Matt. But my one point I'd like to make is around the disability sector, that in this country, people with disabilities across the board earn a third less than the rest of society. And I think that should be a key part of your debate and argument going forward, because that is not a society with any form of equity.
I only found out about that recently, and I absolutely think it needs to be part of the movement going forward. Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And Matt, once again, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come and speak to us this morning. And do come back to Christchurch, and next time you come, stay a little bit longer. Grace, thank you.
Thanks very much.
So that brings us to our second deputation of the morning, and I'd call Bill Simpson from the South Shore Residents Association, Chair of the South Shore Residents Association, and this deputation is regarding item 17, South New Brighton regeneration planning. Now, my intention, once we've heard this deputation, we've got a number of procedural motions that we need to put, but once we've done that, my intention is to bring this item to the top of the agenda so that we can debate item 17 while you're still in the room without you needing to wait. So thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. You have 10 minutes to make the deputation, and if you wanted to allow some time for questions, that's entirely your choice. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you, councillors, for giving us the opportunity to talk to you this morning. Yes, I'm Bill Simpson, Chair of the South Shore Residents Association. I have Denise George, who's committee member, and she did a lot of the mechanics behind a petition that's been floating in South Shore recently, and Tim Sintes, who a lot of you will know about, is also on our committee. So the agenda item I wish to speak to is item 17, which is on page 99 of your agenda, and this is basically an update for you on the regeneration plan for South New Brighton, but there are lots of references in that to South Shore as well. Now, South Shore is a community of 500 households. We were 700 before the earthquakes. And I see that on page 101 of your agenda in section 5.3 that the council has agreed to look at the OCL proposal for flood protection for South Shore. This was the Gary Tier report that was commissioned by the South Shore Residents Association, and Gary did that work for us pro bono. It's a very professional piece of work. So it's a step forward from our point of view for you to agree to review that report and for staff to report back to you. I also see that towards the end of the item 17 on your agenda, on page 104, section 5.26, that the council will work with Regenerate Christchurch to review the time frame for regeneration planning for South Shore. And all I can say is thank goodness. We're not very happy with the time frame that we've heard of from Regeneration Christchurch, and if you can put pressure on for that to be speeded up, thank you very much. And that leads me on to what I really want to say to you. Over the recent week there have been other parts of the city that have been far more badly affected than South Shore, and we realise that, and people were at risk to a greater degree than we were. But the fact is that what happened in South Shore was entirely preventable, unnecessary. We appreciate the work that your staff did at very quick notice on Friday night in particular to build up the temporary structures that protected us from the following tides in South Shore that came in on the Saturday and Sunday. But we did have flooding through South Shore on Friday afternoon with the high tide, and a lot of people in South Shore are very, very angry about that. As I say, the flooding was predictable. There were similar floods 3 years ago to a slightly lesser degree, and your own flooding task force did some work in South Shore as a result of that, but not enough. The work was to strengthen a stop bank at Caspian Street, but they didn't follow through on work that was proposed further down South Shore, which would have protected us. When Sarah cleaned up the red zone along South Shore, they managed to build a low embankment on their own land, and that's barely a metre high. If you go down there, it's just like a walking track. It's not obtrusive, but it does, and it has protected us from some of the high tides over the last 2 or 3 years. But it was always a temporary measure. It's no more than topsoil that was bulldozed up. It's not compacted, and it could easily wash away at any time. And the worst thing for us is that it's not continuous. There are gaps in that embankment, and that's what happened on Friday. Those gaps are where the City Council's roads, the side roads, go through to the estuary. So if you know South Shore, these are gaps like Penguin Street, Plover Street and so on. We've been drawing the Council's attention to that for several years now, that those gaps really need closing. And sure enough, on Friday afternoon with a high tide, high rainfall and the change of wind, that's where the water from the estuary came through. There was a lot of unnecessary damage to gardens, sheds, garages, conservatories, and water flowed through the living areas of at least 3 properties that we know of in South Shore. So those people had to self-evacuate. The main road, Rockinghorse Road, was flooded to knee height, and a lot of people had to leave their cars up in South Brighton on Marine Parade and then try and wade home through the flooded street, and that was on a Friday as they're coming home from work. On Saturday, the community reacted in a spontaneous way. A petition was organised. The South Shore Residents Association was asked to sanction the petition, and so we took it on from that stage to guide it through. And as part of our deputation today, I just want to table that petition. So the petition was signed by 344 members of the community.
Thank you.
Can we have the prayer read, please? Can we have the prayer read, please, on the petition?
So, prayer on the petition. The residents of South Shore write to express our anger and disappointment at the late and inadequate response from Council in relation to flood risk. The flood events of this weekend highlight what we have been saying to the Council for 6.5 years since the earthquake. The previous flood defences on red zone property were demolished and the land scraped and lowered by red zone clearance and not reinstated. A new stormwater system has been installed to half the community, but this inadequate provision is a point of flooding, as witnessed in the last few days. Water from the estuary comes up through the drains and floods the street during high tide. Once the high tide has receded, the outlets do not allow water to drain out. The temporary bund has gaps in it, which lo and behold caused us to flood. This is a man-made and negligence issue, and one that the Council have continued to ignore and deliberately obstruct. We have even offered a solution to try and help, which has been met with yet more obstruction. Turning up with diggers after we have flooded is appalling. The time for action is now. As residents of Christchurch, we urgently need the City Council to show some long overdue leadership on this issue, and we seek urgent, effective remedial action rather than band-aids. The Council talk of resilient cities, yet the lack of action by the Council is resulting in exactly the opposite and causing immense social upset, mental health issues and stress. Signed by 344 residents of South Shore.
So having that, you'll see that it's a petition of anger and frustration, basically. There's not a lot in the petition specifically that we're asking for. There is a mention there of the stormwater system, which certainly needs a good overhaul from our point of view. Badly designed, badly maintained. Underlying the petition, though, is a plea from our residents to say, for heaven's sake, speed up the regeneration planning for South Shore so that we get a permanent solution. Our best guess is that any regeneration planning for South Shore is probably going to take about another 2 or 3 years yet. The public consultation for South Shore has not even started, and after that you'll know that there's design processes and implementation processes. The history of the last 6 years since the earthquake has not been very good. So, in the meantime, are we left to, I shouldn't say to be hung out and dried, because we're not dry, and that's the risk that we face. Until the regeneration planning is completed, we're still exposed to a high risk of flooding. That risk has been reduced somewhat on an emergency basis, and we thank you for that, but it still exists and it still needs to be, and South Shore still needs to be protected. One particular thing I'd ask you to think of is that please don't give any other agency in the city the ability to say to us, we want to do a piece of work, but we're waiting for the council to do their bit first. We've heard that excuse several times, and we would like you to keep up the pressure on our behalf as residents of the city, so that we are not left to this unnecessary flooding again. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come and present to us this morning and for presenting this petition. We'll take a couple of questions in a moment. There will be time for that, but I'll just ask you a question if I can to start off with. Just to clarify, obviously the points that you're raising relate to ongoing frustration over a number of years as set out in the petition, rather than anything particularly relating to the response and the recovery to the flood event that happened over this last few days.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, certainly what I'm hearing is that, you know, the matters that you're raising have been ongoing for some time. The need to deal with these is urgent, and the events of the last few days serve to demonstrate the urgency that is required.
Exactly.
Great, thank you. Okay, so that does leave us with time for a couple of questions. Are there any questions from councillors? Phil.
Thank you, Bill. We may have had this information, but could you just clarify for me, with the Gary Tier report, the OSIL report, which, as you say, has been done professionally, so has that been peer reviewed in terms of for future work?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
All right. And then I guess my other question too was, I'm not sure if you're able to give us any approximate number of houses which, in fact, were flooded above floor level. Do you have any?
In South Shore, there were 3 that we know of where the water actually flowed through the living area.
Above the floor level?
Yeah, hundreds, conservatories and garages and so on. Yeah.
We understand that. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Glenn.
Thank you, Bill. Just by way of long-term response, and this is getting down into the detail and we can't second guess it, but do the residents have a variety of views over, for instance, what you would do with the estuary edge? So some may want hard protection, some may want softer, etc. And is there a range of views over climate change, sea level rise as well?
Yes, from both extremes, and our community was initially, I suppose to be honest, quite split. Hard edge, soft edge, those are the terms that we used. When Gary Tiers was commissioned to do this report, he came up with a solution that satisfied 98% of our community. We know that by survey. So it does combine all those views within that proposal. Yeah.
Thank you. Dave.
Thank you, Bill. Following the episode last weekend, are there any immediate actions that you would like to see council enact following the work that's been done over the weekend?
In terms of operations on the scene, you mean?
Yes.
Certainly to look at whether those stop banks they put in temporarily are enough. I suspect that we're still at risk because the embankments that Sarah put in 2 years ago now, which are just topsoil, wouldn't stand up to another serious flood. As I say, it's uncompacted, it's low, it could give away at any moment's notice. So whether your people could look at that, see whether it needs to be added to, and that's probably about 70 to 80% of the wall actually that needs to be looked at. That would be the first thing. Second thing, as mentioned in the petition, is that stormwater system, the stormwater drainage system. The valves look to most residents as a very poor design. As I say, not easily maintained either.
And what about work, finishing off work on the bunds that have been constructed?
Yes, certainly at the moment, those is, I'm pretty sure, it's a stop bank. It needs, I mean, I'm not an engineer, although we all become engineers very quickly, don't we? But I would assume that at some stage your staff will be looking at consolidating, compacting and covering that with grass and stabilising it, and the sooner the better from a beautifying point of view too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and once again thank you very much for taking the time to come and present to us this morning on what we know is a very important issue. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
So we have a resolution in front of us noting and receiving the petition, noting the current work underway to address estuary edge issues at South Shore, including through the recovery plan in response to flooding events of 21st to 23rd July. Staff report back to Council on the OSAL proposal and alternative options for short-term measures, and the South Shore and South New Brighton regeneration strategy led by Regenerate Christchurch and City Council, and then request that the Chief Executive consider the petition in the context of the various work streams already underway related to the South Shore area, including the regeneration strategy work being led by Regenerate Christchurch. Do I have a mover for this resolution? Pauline, and a seconder. Dave. Yanni.
Thank you. I was just interested in number 2. Given that I guess we have contractors who have just done work there, is any work underway looking at maximising the efficiency of what's just been done? Because there's nothing in those resolutions that highlight if we are or if we aren't.
Do you mean in terms of what's been done in terms of the emergency response?
Yeah, that's right.
So it's a very temporary response.
Okay.
And so what part of the recovery plan we'll look at is what can be maintained and managed, and then how we link that into the medium-term, longer-term responses as well. So
is there any other temporary emergency works or short-term works that are being considered while we've got the contractors there?
So the contractors are there just to fill in the gaps in the bund. We've been talking to LINZ about what they might do to their part of the fund as well.
Okay, so we've heard from the deputation concern at the LINZ land. So we do have a process underway to make sure that
that's part of the recovery planning.
And how long is that going to take?
Well, that's happening now.
Right. Do we have a time frame for?
28 days we have.
Okay.
We've powers within that time to be able to do things.
Cool. So we've got the power in the meantime to do stuff, and if we can do it sooner, we'll do it sooner?
Yeah, we'll do it as soon as we can.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got a resolution in front of us which has been moved and seconded. All those in favour? Oh, Dave. Well, we've had a question and nobody else signalled questions. Did you want to debate this?
I just wanted to speak to the motion.
Okay, so we're now in debate. That's great.
Look, I do support the notion of regeneration plans, but I'm really disappointed at times that the time frame is so protracted. And we've heard from Bill and the South Shore people about, they've waited for 6 years or more now to get things going. I'm also concerned that this plan really only focuses on the mapped area shown in the report. And
now, are we debating the deputation, or are we debating the paper that we're not considering yet? Because this is just around the deputation of the resolution that's in front of us. We will then move very shortly to debate the paper which is on our agenda.
I'm debating the paper. I thought we were doing that.
Yeah. So it sounds as though what you're saying will be more appropriate to bring up when we get to the debate on the paper.
Righto.
All right. Now, Glenn, you'd signalled you're the same. Yeah, because we'll come to the paper shortly. All we're doing at the moment is dealing with the matters raised in the deputation and how we're going to deal with the petition. All right. So I will put the motion which is in front of us. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you.